The news had barely broken when shockwaves tore through both Britain and America. A terse announcement out of Parliament declared that a new bill was on the table, one that could permanently remove royal titles from members of the monarchy who no longer serve or who openly defy the expectations of their birthright. And at the center of this bombshell was none other than Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, a man whose name has already become synonymous with royal rebellion. Yet this time, the stakes felt different. This wasn't just about titles or respect. Within the same breath, the headlines carried a second, almost unbelievable claim. Prince Harry, now considered more private citizen than royal, was being forced to pay $700,000 in back taxes, with just 48 hours on the clock. The countdown had already begun. The story almost seemed too dramatic to believe. Yet, as every new report poured in, the threads of this crisis wove into a narrative that was bigger than just Harry and Meghan. This was about the tension between modern monarchy and government accountability, about the clash between public perception and private privilege, and about the vulnerability of a man who once walked behind the coffin of his mother, mourned by millions, and who now finds himself publicly humiliated by a ticking financial ultimatum. Viewers across the globe could not look away. The very idea of a prince, stripped of his titles and dragged into the harsh light of everyday obligations, stirred something visceral in the public consciousness. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The beginning of this tale demands we pause to consider the irony. Harry, once beloved as the cheeky younger son of Princess Diana, has lived his life in extremes. He has been both soldier and celebrity, both insider and outcast, both adored and condemned. And yet, at this moment, the image flashing across television screens was not of a dashing prince or a rebel royal, but of a man cornered by institutions far larger than himself. The government's move was not hidden behind whispers in corridors or veiled hints. It was explicit, announced, and placed in the public domain for everyone to scrutinize. The British press pounced, splashing headlines across the morning editions, while international outlets added their own spin. Was this accountability, vengeance, or a desperate attempt by Parliament to assert its authority over the monarchy? In the middle of this storm lies the deeply human reality. Imagine waking up to the realization that within 2 days, you are required to pay more money than many people earn in a decade, and that the world is watching, waiting to see if you stumble. The cameras capture the cars pulling into Montecito, speculating on whether lawyers or financial advisors are being ushered in. Inside that grand California home, one can picture the heated conversations, the raised voices, the panicked calculations. Meghan Markle, often painted as the mastermind or the villain depending on which narrative you believe, is said to have immediately turned her attention to public relations. How will this look? What statement, if any, should be made? And most importantly, how do they protect the image they have spent years building in America? But beyond the personal panic, this story is larger than Harry's immediate reaction. This is the opening act of a larger clash between centuries-old royal tradition and modern political will. Parliament's decision to float the removal of titles bill is not an isolated action. It is rooted in years of public frustration, whispers of hypocrisy, and the repeated question: why should royals, particularly those who no longer live or serve in the UK, continue to enjoy the trappings of privilege? For critics of Harry and Meghan, this moment was long overdue, almost poetic justice. For their supporters, however, it was cruel, punitive, and humiliating, targeting a man who had already cut ties with the institution that caused him so much pain. The introduction of the bill marks the first half of this unfolding drama, but the second half, the tax demand, is what gives it a sense of crushing immediacy. The UK government doesn't simply want to take away something symbolic, like titles. It is now pulling Harry into the same web of accountability that ensnares ordinary citizens. $700,000. 48 hours. That is the brutal arithmetic he is facing. And for a public already skeptical of Harry's Hollywood ventures, the question lingers: can he even pay? Despite multi-million-dollar Netflix and Spotify deals, reports of lavish spending, legal fees, and the maintenance of a luxury lifestyle cast doubt on whether Harry has liquid cash available at short notice. The introduction of this story demands we feel the weight of the clock. Every hour matters. The cameras are waiting, commentators are analyzing, and ordinary citizens are reflecting on what it means for a prince to be forced into such a position. This is not merely a financial story, it is a deeply emotional one. Harry has often painted himself as a man caught between worlds, and now, the countdown threatens to expose exactly how precarious that position is. Will he be seen as a man who rises to the challenge, proves his independence, and pays his dues? Or will he be remembered as a royal who squandered goodwill, fled responsibility, and finally faced the harsh hand of consequence? As we near the end of this opening section, the emotional stakes become clearer. This is not about numbers on a spreadsheet or votes in Parliament alone. This is about legacy, reputation, and identity. Harry is more than just a man with a deadline. He is a symbol of modern royalty's fragile balance with the public. His every move in the next 48 hours will be dissected, criticized, praised, or mocked. The world will watch how a man born into unimaginable privilege handles a moment when privilege can no longer shield him. This, then, is where the story begins, with a prince under pressure, a parliament flexing its authority, and a public eager to see what happens next. The next chapters will peel back the layers of how this crisis exploded, who stands behind it, and how Harry and Meghan navigate a countdown that could redefine their place in history. But for now, as the clock ticks down and the headlines grow louder, we are left with a question that lingers in the air like thunder before a storm. When the time runs out, what will Harry do? The storm that gathered around Prince Harry in these opening hours was not one of his own making alone. It was the result of years of accumulated tension, years in which his every decision, from leaving Britain for California to giving interviews that criticized the royal institution, had layered resentment among politicians, the press, and segments of the British public. Now, all of that history had crystallized into a moment of reckoning. The removal of titles bill was not simply about a name on a legal document. It was about stripping away the symbolic armor that had long separated Harry from the struggles of ordinary life. For the first time, he was not shielded by a palace or a crown, and he stood exposed before the eyes of both a nation and the wider world. The urgency of the 48-hour tax demand added an element of suspense that turned political maneuvering into a human drama. Every major news outlet framed it as a countdown. Harry's 48 hours, screamed one tabloid. Another declared, from palace to pressure, Duke faces tax bombshell. It wasn't just the numbers that shocked people, it was the sheer speed of the deadline. Governments rarely move quickly, but in this case, the narrative was set. There would be no long extension, no time for complicated negotiations. Either Harry paid, or he risked being dragged further into financial and legal chaos. The image of a prince scrambling to meet a deadline resonated with millions of ordinary citizens who themselves have faced deadlines from tax authorities. For some, it was satisfying, a leveling of the playing field. For others, it was tragic, a reminder of how far Harry had fallen from the adoring crowds who once celebrated him as Diana's son. In the middle of this, there were whispers of desperation. Advisors reportedly worked through the night, reviewing accounts, cash flow, and assets. Meghan's concerns, according to insiders, were not just about the money but about the optics. She knew how quickly perception could harden. Once the public narrative became that Harry could not pay, their brand, the very foundation of their American reinvention, would suffer irreversible damage. Every move had to be calculated, every leak carefully considered. Would they release a statement? Would they maintain silence and hope the storm passed? Or would they attempt to use the press to their advantage, framing this as yet another example of persecution by the British establishment? As the hours ticked by, one couldn't help but recall Harry's own past words about wanting to live as a private citizen. Yet here he was, thrust into the most public of battles. A private citizen does not have their financial struggles debated on live television. A private citizen does not see their name trending globally because of a tax bill. The contradiction between what Harry wanted and what reality delivered was stark. The opening act of this story is defined by this tension. Between the desire for freedom and the weight of public scrutiny, between the privilege of royalty and the harsh equality of the tax system. But this moment also draws on deeper historical echoes. Britain has long had a complicated relationship with its royals, balancing reverence with resentment. Past kings and queens have been forced to abdicate, exiled, or seen their authority diminished. Harry's case may seem different. After all, he was never in line for the throne in a serious sense. But symbolically, it speaks to the same old question: how much privilege is too much? When a society feels that one figure has stretched the limits of entitlement, retribution often follows swiftly. That is exactly what this removal of titles bill signified to many: a rebalancing of scales, a reminder that no one, not even a prince, is above the system. As we build toward the end of this introduction, the weight of the countdown must be felt not just by Harry, but by the audience watching. Imagine the silence in the Montecito mansion late at night, when the phones stop ringing and the advisors retreat to prepare strategies. Meghan sits with Harry, both knowing that beyond the politics, beyond the press, lies a question of identity. If he pays, he confirms his role as just another citizen, accountable like anyone else. If he fails, he risks not just embarrassment, but further humiliation, perhaps even legal escalation. The moment is fragile, the kind that defines a life story. The opening of this narrative is not a climax, but a beginning. It is the sound of a clock ticking in the background, the murmur of Parliament echoing across oceans, the sense of inevitability pressing against Harry's every breath. This is how the story starts, with urgency, humiliation, and a question mark hanging over the future of a man once known simply as the People's Prince. The news did not come quietly, nor was it hidden in the footnotes of some obscure government document. It came roaring into the public sphere with the kind of force reserved for moments that rewrite the rules of history. On the morning the removal of titles bill was introduced in Parliament, the chamber was buzzing with the kind of tense electricity that even seasoned MPs rarely witnessed. The bill itself, stark in its language, proposed that members of the royal family who renounce their duties or who live permanently abroad could see their titles legally revoked. What made it explosive was not the bill's text alone, but the timing and the subtext. This was aimed at one man, Prince Harry. Inside the House of Commons, the murmur of voices grew louder as the motion was read out. Politicians from both sides of the aisle leaned in, some nodding in firm approval, others whispering reservations. It was a spectacle meant not just for the chamber, but for the nation. The television cameras captured the solemn expressions of MPs as they debated whether the monarchy could still demand respect in a modern democratic society when one of its most high-profile members seemed to enjoy the trappings of royalty without shouldering the responsibilities. The backdrop was Britain's ongoing cost of living crisis, a time when ordinary citizens were struggling to pay energy bills and put food on their tables. To many, Harry's continued use of royal privilege while living abroad in luxury California estates felt like a slap in the face. The press gallery was packed. Every journalist worth their name knew this was not just another debate about constitutional minutiae. This was political theater of the highest order, a collision of monarchy, modern democracy, and public anger. Reporters scribbled notes feverishly, already drafting the headlines that would dominate the evening news. Some MPs argued with passion that Harry had crossed the line by publicly criticizing his own family, tarnishing the crown's reputation, and yet continuing to trade on the Sussex title. They painted the bill as a measure of fairness, a reclaiming of integrity for Parliament and the people. Others countered that the move risked politicizing the monarchy in dangerous ways, that it was an act of vengeance disguised as reform. Yet even as these arguments played out, the unspoken truth was clear: the bill was more than symbolic. By stripping titles, Parliament was sending a message that even the most sacred institutions in Britain were subject to accountability. And attached to this was the unprecedented detail that Harry, now recognized as a private resident in the United States, could no longer benefit from tax exemptions that had quietly cushioned his royal existence. That is how the $700,000 tax bill suddenly arrived at his door, paired with the 48-hour deadline that gave the entire episode the character of a countdown thriller. For the ordinary citizen watching from home, the images broadcast from Westminster seemed almost surreal. To see elected politicians openly challenge a member of the royal family in such stark terms was itself extraordinary. Britain's monarchy had always occupied a strange space, revered yet questioned, admired yet criticized, untouchable yet scrutinized. This bill punctured the illusion of untouchability. The sight of Harry's name invoked not in a tabloid headline, but in the official record of Parliament carried a weight that no gossip column could match. It was a stripping away of the aura that had long surrounded him. As debates continued, stories began to leak of how the discussion had been brewing for months. Certain MPs, emboldened by public opinion polls showing declining support for the monarchy, had been searching for a moment to act. Harry's high-profile interviews, in which he accused members of the royal household of cruelty and neglect, had given them ammunition. Every revelation in his memoir, every Netflix confessional, every perceived slight to the institution became a brick in the wall that now threatened to collapse around him. The intensity of the chamber spilled out onto the streets. Protesters gathered outside Parliament, some waving signs demanding justice and equality, others calling the move a national embarrassment. Chants echoed through Westminster. No titles for traitors clashed with "Leave Harry alone." The scene was chaotic, passionate, a mirror of the divided sentiments across the nation. Inside Montecito, the news was received with disbelief. Advisors scrambled to obtain copies of the bill, to parse the language for loopholes, to understand whether this was a stunt or a true legal threat. The British press reported that Harry had been blindsided, that there had been no warning, no quiet letter before the public spectacle. To be named and shamed in the heart of Britain's political establishment was, for him, the ultimate insult. For Meghan, it was a nightmare, a story that confirmed the worst suspicions of Hollywood elites that her connection to royalty was more liability than asset. As the first chapter of this story unfolds, the atmosphere is one of shock and theater. Parliament has acted with boldness rarely seen in relation to the monarchy. Harry has been thrust into the crosshairs, and the press has been gifted the kind of scandal that guarantees ratings and sales. Yet beneath the spectacle lies the deeper emotional reality. A son of Diana, once protected and adored, is now being treated not as a cherished prince, but as a man stripped of immunity, forced to face the same deadlines and demands as any other citizen. The bombshell had landed, and its echoes were only just beginning to reverberate. The chamber that day in Westminster was unlike its usual self, often filled with procedural monotony, scattered debates, and the kind of drawn-out speeches that most citizens rarely bother to watch. It now felt more like the stage of a historical drama. The very idea of a removal of titles bill struck at something primal in the British psyche. Royal titles, after all, are not just ceremonial. They are centuries of tradition, echoes of empire, remnants of a system that once defined the nation's identity. And now, here were elected officials daring to propose that one of Diana's sons could be cut loose from that legacy, his title legally stripped away by Act of Parliament. As one MP rose to make his case, the room fell into a silence that betrayed the gravity of the moment. His words were sharp, calculated, and aimed directly at the heart of public frustration. He spoke of fairness, of accountability, of the absurdity of allowing a man who had publicly abandoned his duties and who now lived in luxury thousands of miles away to still benefit from the reverence of a royal title. He reminded the chamber that Britain was a modern democracy, not a museum for outdated privilege, and that titles must mean something more than a decorative nameplate. Each word seemed designed not just for his fellow lawmakers, but for the cameras waiting outside, where millions of viewers tuned in, jaws clenched, to witness this unprecedented confrontation. Across the aisle, another MP stood in opposition. Her tone was softer, but her words carried weight. She warned that such a move could open the door to politicizing the monarchy in dangerous ways. The royals, she argued, have survived centuries precisely because they sit above the fray of politics. Dragging them into legislative battles could chip away at the institution's mystique, undermining its very survival. And yet, even she could not avoid admitting that Prince Harry's actions, his televised interviews, his memoir filled with accusations, his visible alignment with Hollywood glamour over British duty, had made him a uniquely vulnerable figure. The debate captured the paradox. Harry had never been further from the throne, but never closer to the crosshairs of political scrutiny. The energy inside Parliament spilled outward into the streets of London. Crowds formed outside the gates, waving banners and chanting. Some carried placards declaring, "Not our prince," in bold, black letters. Others held posters of Diana, their message implicit: her son deserved protection, not persecution. The split mirrored the broader sentiment across the nation. For every citizen who felt Harry had betrayed his homeland, another believed he had been chased away by an archaic and unfeeling institution. Reporters interviewed shopkeepers, students, and taxi drivers, each offering their take. Some saw poetic justice in the idea of Harry finally being forced to live like the rest of them. Others, however, saw cruelty, a piling on that seemed designed to break him entirely. Back inside the chamber, the discussion reached its peak when the tax demand was introduced into the debate. It was not just a question of titles anymore. The government wanted to send an unmistakable message that the privileges of royalty could not shield Harry from the obligations of citizenship. The figure, $700,000, hung in the air like a thundercloud. The idea that the prince had just 48 hours to resolve the matter gave the entire affair the urgency of a cliffhanger. It was not lost on anyone that the deadline was impossibly short, designed perhaps not just to collect revenue, but to force humiliation. The press had a field day. Front pages were printed within hours, their headlines bold and merciless. Harry on the clock. Prince or pauper. Titles torn, taxes due. The public could not escape the story. Television hosts debated it late into the night, with panels of experts dissecting every angle. Constitutional scholars explained the unprecedented nature of Parliament directly naming a royal in such a bill. Former palace staff offered tidbits of behind-the-scenes drama, speculating on Harry's state of mind. Even comedians weighed in, their jokes sharp enough to sting but light enough to spread across social media. And then came the leaks. Whispers from Montecito suggested that Harry had been blindsided, that there had been no quiet approach, no dignified attempt to resolve the matter discreetly. Instead, his name had been dragged into the public arena without warning. For a man already deeply distrustful of institutions, this was salt in the wound. Advisors reportedly scrambled to assess his finances, poring over the details of contracts and deals that once seemed like a lifeline, but now looked dangerously precarious. Meghan, according to these sources, was incensed, not merely at the bill, but at the optics. She knew that in Hollywood, image was currency, and the image of her husband as a man cornered and humiliated could devastate their carefully crafted brand. The symbolism of it all could not be ignored. To see Harry, son of Diana, named in Parliament and paired with a tax bill, was to witness the collapse of a myth. He was no longer the untouchable prince. He was a man forced into the same uncomfortable spotlight that so many citizens knew all too well. The unrelenting weight of the taxman, the judgment of politicians, the scrutiny of strangers. His past as a soldier, a charity founder, even a royal, all of it felt irrelevant in that moment. What mattered now was whether he could meet a deadline set not by a crown, but by the state. As the debate concluded, the sense of finality lingered. The chamber emptied, MPs filing out into a sea of reporters demanding sound bites. Some smiled grimly, confident that they had made a stand for fairness. Others looked uneasy, aware of the dangerous precedent that might now unfold. But all knew that the story was far from over. The real drama would unfold in the hours ahead, as Harry and Meghan faced their reckoning under the weight of a ticking clock. For now, though, the first chapter ends with a nation stunned. The parliamentary bombshell had been dropped, its echoes reverberating through the streets of London, across the Atlantic, and into the heart of a family already fractured by years of public battles. The countdown had begun, and the world was watching. The moment the news filtered through to Montecito, the atmosphere in the Sussex household shifted from ordinary calm to an almost cinematic intensity. Harry had been through public scandals before, but this was different. He was used to being pursued by paparazzi, dissected by tabloids, even accused by members of his own family. But the removal of Title's bill and the sudden $700,000 tax demand felt like a direct assault. It wasn't just the press twisting a story, it wasn't just gossip, it was Parliament, the official voice of the British state, moving against him. That realization hit harder than he expected. Insiders who claimed to have knowledge of the situation describe Harry as pacing restlessly through the house, phone in hand, calling advisors, calling lawyers, and demanding to know how such a thing could happen. To his mind, titles were hereditary, not subject to the whims of politicians. And the tax demand? That felt, in his view, like punishment, not policy. The image of him gripping his phone, jaw tight, eyes scanning messages that came faster than he could read them, paints the picture of a man who suddenly realized that the very institution he had left behind was not done with him yet. Meghan, by contrast, reportedly reacted with a different energy. Whereas Harry's first instinct was shock and anger, Meghan immediately went into crisis mode. She had built a career in Hollywood where narratives were crafted carefully, and she understood that the way they framed their reaction publicly could either soften the blow or make it worse. Her conversations with Harry, however, were not gentle. Some close to them suggest she reminded him that she had warned of consequences when he chose to write his memoir and give those candid interviews. Her fear was that he had handed his critics ammunition, and now Parliament was firing it back. For Harry, though, the sting of betrayal seemed personal. He had served his country in uniform, put his life on the line in Afghanistan, and worked tirelessly on causes like mental health and wounded veterans. To be treated now as though he were some reckless aristocrat avoiding responsibility felt to him like an injustice. His voice reportedly rose as he reminded those around him that he had tried, for years, to balance duty with personal happiness, only to be pushed to the breaking point. His frustration boiled over when discussing the deadline. 48 hours? Who does that to their own son of the realm? He is said to have muttered, disbelief clouding his words. Advisors worked frantically to steady him. They told him to breathe, to think strategically, to avoid emotional outbursts that could make things worse. But Harry was never one to hide his feelings. Those who know him well often remark that he inherited Diana's heart, open, raw, and unafraid to show emotion. Now, in this moment, that heart was beating hard against a wall of political coldness. The household itself reflected the mood. Staff members whispered in corners, sensing the tension but not daring to speak aloud. The children, too young to understand, played in nearby rooms, their laughter a stark contrast to the grim discussions unfolding behind closed doors. Meghan occasionally slipped away to check on them, her face softening for a moment before she returned to the battle brewing in the study. For Harry, seeing his children's innocence only deepened the sense of urgency. He wanted to shield them from scandal, to ensure that Archie and Lilibet would not grow up defined by the mistakes or the punishments of their parents. Financial advisors were patched in through video calls, spreadsheets projected on large screens as they combed through income streams, contract payments, and assets. The Netflix deal, the Spotify payout, the book advance, all were examined with surgical precision. Could they cover the amount? Yes, technically, but liquidity was another matter. Much of their money was tied up, and converting it into immediate cash within 48 hours would require extraordinary maneuvers. Lawyers debated whether the demand could be challenged, whether extensions could be requested. Yet time was short, and the optics of asking for more time might look worse than paying late. Harry's reaction oscillated between fury and despair. One moment he lashed out, accusing Parliament of waging a vendetta. The next, he sat in silence, staring out the window at the California sun, as though trying to reconcile the golden world outside with the storm brewing thousands of miles away in London. Meghan, sitting across from him, kept her laptop open, already drafting potential statements, calling PR contacts, and assessing which journalists might spin the story in their favor. Behind the scenes, phone calls flew to allies across the Atlantic. Friends in Hollywood, sympathetic media figures, and even charitable partners were contacted, gauging support. Some responded with sympathy, others with caution. Few wanted to be seen defending Harry against a sovereign government's decision. That, perhaps, was the bitterest pill: isolation. Once surrounded by a protective network of family, staff, and loyal supporters, Harry now felt like a man cornered in a house far from home, reliant on the goodwill of people whose loyalty might not run as deep as he hoped. Yet within the chaos, there was also a moment of grim clarity. Harry reportedly told those closest to him that he would not let Parliament define him. Stripped of titles, weighed down by tax demands, he still saw himself as Diana's son, a man who had endured public loss and private torment, and who would not back down now. His determination, though, was laced with fear of humiliation, fear of being seen as incapable, fear of confirming his critics' worst accusations. The middle of this chapter belongs to that fear, the gnawing realization that for once, he could not simply lean on the shield of royalty. This was a battle fought in the language of deadlines and bank accounts, not crowns and ceremonies. And it shook him to the core. By the end of that first day, as the California evening light faded into darkness, the house was still alive with activity. Advisors left, calls ended, but Harry remained awake, restless. Meghan urged him to rest, but he refused. Every hour mattered. Every decision carried weight. Sleep would not come easily to a man whose future was being debated in the halls of Westminster and whose financial survival was tied to a clock ticking down without mercy. The second chapter of this story closes not with resolution, but with tension. Harry's reaction was one of shock, fury, and frantic calculation. Behind closed doors, he grappled with betrayal, responsibility, and fear, while Meghan worked to control the narrative and shield their brand. The world outside speculated endlessly, but inside that California home, the reality was far more raw. A man who once wore a crown in the hearts of millions now faced a countdown that threatened to strip away not just his title, but his dignity. When the announcement first broke that Prince Harry had 48 hours to pay $700,000 in taxes, the figure itself seemed almost secondary to the brutal clock attached to it. The sum was staggering, yes, but it was the ticking of time that made the story so electrifying. 48 hours meant no room for negotiation, no time for comfort, no breathing space to weigh options carefully. It was a deadline designed not just to collect money, but to send a message. For Harry, the realization that the government had attached such urgency to his situation was like stepping onto a tightrope suspended above a crowd eager to see whether he would fall. The countdown became a story in itself. Television networks across Britain ran graphics of clocks ticking down, hour by hour. On the bottom of news broadcasts, digital timers ticked away, a constant reminder to viewers that Harry's time was running out. Newspapers printed bold headlines that read more like movie posters than journalism. 48 hours of truth, the prince and the taxman, Harry's deadline. It was sensational, relentless, and impossible to escape. For many Britons, who had faced tax deadlines themselves, the imagery resonated. They knew the feeling of dread when a letter from HMRC arrived. They knew the sleepless nights, the frantic phone calls, the gnawing pit in the stomach. And now, to see a prince, one who had spoken so often about living as an ordinary man, placed under the same kind of pressure felt almost poetic. The political machinery behind the countdown was more complex than the headline suggested. This was not an arbitrary figure pulled from thin air. Analysts explained that once Parliament introduced the removal of titles bill, Harry's position changed. He could no longer claim certain royal exemptions or protections that had previously shielded his income and assets. The $700,000 sum, experts argued, was the accumulated result of years of benefits and overlooked obligations. Once his status shifted, the taxman moved in. It was not personal, officials insisted. It was law. But to the public, and certainly to Harry, it felt personal. It felt punitive. Inside Montecito, the effect of the countdown was suffocating. Advisors created schedules, mapping out hour-by-hour plans. Calls to financial institutions had to be made immediately. Assets that could be liquidated were identified. The family's legal team debated whether paying quickly was the safest route or whether they should challenge the demand and risk being branded as resistant. Meghan urged decisiveness. To her, the optics mattered more than the details. Any delay, any hesitation, would be seen as weakness. But Harry bristled at the idea of bowing so quickly to pressure he believed was unfairly imposed. The discussions grew tense, punctuated by long silences that spoke louder than words. The countdown also had a psychological dimension. Harry, a man who had faced combat, who had flown helicopters in Afghanistan under fire, now found himself shaken by the pressure of a bureaucratic deadline. It wasn't bullets whizzing past him this time, but the weight of public humiliation. He could not bear the thought of waking up in 48 hours to headlines declaring him bankrupt, incapable, or disgraced. The ticking clock invaded his thoughts, each passing hour a reminder of his dwindling options. Sleep eluded him. Advisors recalled him staring at the clock late into the night, his jaw set, his mind racing. Meanwhile, in Britain, the countdown took on a life of its own. On talk shows, hosts asked their guests what they would do if they had just 2 days to pay such a bill. Some laughed bitterly, pointing out that ordinary people would never even be given the choice. If they failed to pay, they faced fines, seizures, or worse. To them, Harry's situation was almost enviable. At least he had the wealth and connections to stand a chance. Others, however, saw the 48-hour deadline as cruelly symbolic, a deliberate attempt to humiliate him publicly. Social media amplified these debates, dividing timelines into camps. Hashtag #PayHarryPay trended alongside hashtag #LeaveHarryAlone. Memes spread rapidly. Images of countdown clocks imposed over Harry's face, or doctored movie posters casting him as a protagonist in a suspense thriller titled 48 Hours. Experts weighed in, their commentary adding another layer of pressure. Financial analysts explained how difficult it would be to access such a large sum in such a short time, especially if much of Harry's wealth was tied up in long-term investments or contracts. Legal scholars debated whether the deadline was even enforceable, or whether it was more symbolic theater than actual law. But for Harry, none of that mattered. What mattered was perception. What mattered was that millions believed he had just 2 days to prove himself, and that failure would confirm the worst suspicions of his critics. As the clock ticked down, Harry's world narrowed to the mechanics of money. Calls to banks, arrangements for transfers, the logistics of liquidating assets. All of it consumed him. For a man who had once lived in palaces and castles, who had once been insulated from the banalities of bills and tax forms, the immersion into this world was jarring. He was no longer a prince above it all. He was a man scrambling to meet a deadline, no different in that moment from the millions of citizens who had ever panicked at the sight of an official letter demanding payment. And yet, beneath the logistics and the pressure, a deeper fear gnawed at him. What if he failed? What if, despite the contracts and the deals, despite the fortune that tabloids loved to speculate about, he could not produce the sum in time? The humiliation would be total. His critics would paint him as a fraud, a pretender who had abandoned his family and country only to prove incapable of standing on his own. The monarchy would appear vindicated, the public would laugh, and his brand in America, built on resilience, independence, and reinvention, would crumble. That possibility haunted him more than the numbers themselves. As day turned to night and the hours slipped away, the countdown became more than a financial deadline. It became a test of identity. Was Harry truly the independent man he claimed to be, capable of surviving outside the protective walls of the monarchy? Or was he still tethered to privilege, unable to stand without it? That was the question hanging in the air, whispered in the media, debated in homes, and gnawing at Harry himself. The third chapter of this story ends not with resolution, but with an image. Harry, staring at a clock in his Montecito home, each second echoing louder than the last, while across the world millions of strangers watched and waited. The countdown had become a spectacle, and whether he triumphed or fell, the world would not look away. If Harry's reaction to the sudden bombshell was visceral anger and disbelief, Meghan's was something sharper, quieter, and far more calculating. For her, the news that Parliament had introduced a removal of titles bill and attached a looming $700,000 tax demand to her husband was not only an attack on Harry. It was an attack on the very foundation of the life they had built in America. Behind closed doors in Montecito, Meghan's anguish was palpable, not in tears or hysteria, but in the way her mind immediately spun through every possible consequence. She had always known, deep down, that their decision to leave Britain would come with costs. But she had also believed in the dream of reinvention, the idea that in California, they could build a brand on their own terms. Titles, for her, were leverage, a way to command respect in rooms filled with Hollywood producers and corporate executives. Stripped of that veneer, what remained? The thought that Parliament could move against Harry so openly, so ruthlessly, shook her to her core. It was not only about money or names, it was about relevance, about power, about how the world saw them. Those who claimed to have insight into Meghan's state of mind describe her pacing through the Montecito mansion, her phone glued to her hand as she called PR strategists, friends in Hollywood, and even sympathetic journalists. Her words, though calm, carried the unmistakable tremor of urgency. She spoke about how dangerous the optics were. The headlines, she feared, would define them more than the truth itself. If they see him as weak, if they see us as desperate, she reportedly told one confidant, everything we've built crumbles. For Meghan, image was currency, and right now the currency was collapsing. Her anguish was also deeply personal. She remembered her early struggles as an actress, when auditions ended in rejection and her financial reality was a constant source of stress. Back then, she had fought to climb, fought to be seen, fought to survive in an industry that dismissed her again and again. To now face the prospect of being publicly humiliated as the wife of a man unable to meet a tax deadline felt like a cruel twist of fate. She had worked too hard, endured too much, to allow the narrative of failure to be stamped across her family's name. Tension between her and Harry grew as their responses diverged. He leaned toward anger, toward fighting the decision, toward framing it as unjust punishment. Meghan, however, understood the danger of appearing defiant. She urged pragmatism, insisting that they had to meet the deadline, even if it meant liquidating assets, even if it meant making sacrifices. We cannot let them see us flinch, she is said to have told him. But Harry, still reeling, resisted. Their discussions stretched late into the night, voices raised, silence following. For Meghan, the anguish was not only about the external attack, but about the cracks it exposed within their marriage. The different ways they coped with crisis, the fault lines between emotion and strategy. Hollywood, too, loomed large in her thoughts. Meghan knew that powerful people in Los Angeles were watching closely. In an industry built on perception, weakness was fatal. Executives deciding whether to greenlight future projects, producers considering whether to partner with Archwell, even acquaintances in high society gatherings. All would take their cues from how this story unfolded. If the Sussexes were painted as unstable or financially precarious, doors could quietly close. For Meghan, the nightmare was not only the humiliation of a headline, but the loss of influence in a world where influence was everything. Friends tried to comfort her, reminding her that the crisis could be spun into sympathy. She could frame Harry as a victim of institutional cruelty. She could highlight the unfairness of the 48-hour deadline. But Meghan knew that sympathy was a double-edged sword. Too much of it, and they risked looking pitiful. Too little, and they looked entitled. The balance was delicate, almost impossible. And in the middle of it, she felt trapped, forced to manage the crisis while the world's eyes dissected her every move. Her anguish also came from a deeper fear, one that rarely surfaced in public but haunted her in private. The possibility that her children could one day inherit these scandals as their legacy. Archie and Lilibet, still innocent and shielded, would one day read the headlines, watch the documentaries, and understand the battles their parents fought. What would they think when they saw their father's title stripped, their family's name dragged through Parliament, their parents mocked for failing to meet a tax deadline? Meghan's heart clenched at the thought. She had promised herself that she would protect her children from the coldness she had faced growing up, yet here she was, fighting a battle that might mark them forever. As the hours of the countdown passed, Meghan's anguish manifested in relentless activity. She coordinated with lawyers, reviewed financial accounts, and insisted on preparing statements for every possible scenario. She demanded updates every hour, unwilling to let a single moment slip. And yet, when the house grew quiet in the early hours of the morning, when Harry had finally collapsed into restless half-sleep, Meghan found herself staring out the window at the California night sky, her thoughts a torrent of fear and determination. She wondered how it had come to this, how the dream of freedom and reinvention had turned into a nightmare of deadlines and humiliation. For Meghan, the pain was not only in the crisis itself, but in the reminder of how precarious their position truly was. They had built their lives on the fragile foundation of reputation, of public perception, of carefully managed branding. And in a single moment, Parliament had shaken that foundation. Her anguish was the recognition that no matter how far they had run, no matter how much they had tried to redefine themselves, the shadow of the crown still reached across the ocean and into their home. By the end of that day, Meghan's anguish had not subsided. If anything, it had deepened, hardened into resolve. She would not allow them to be humiliated. She would fight, not only for Harry, but but for the future of their children and the preservation of the image they had worked so hard to build. The countdown was not only Harry's test. It was hers too, and she knew the world was watching to see whether she would falter. The moment Parliament passed the removal of titles bill, a clock seemed to start ticking in the Sussex household. Harry had been blindsided by the suddenness of it all, but as the reality sank in, he realized that this was more than just symbolic punishment. It was a tangible, crushing demand. Within 48 hours, he was expected to produce $700,000 to settle a tax obligation or face serious consequences. The enormity of the task pressed down on him like a physical weight, a relentless reminder that even a prince, when removed from royal privilege, was subject to the full force of law. In the immediate aftermath, Harry retreated into the study of their Montecito home, a room lined with books, awards, and photographs of family milestones. His mind raced through every possible way to meet the deadline, each scenario more stressful than the last. He called financial advisors, tax specialists, and even former royal accountants, seeking a solution that could both satisfy the government and preserve his dignity. Each call, however, seemed to reveal more complications than solutions. Some funds were tied up in trusts that required weeks, if not months, to liquidate. Others were entangled in legal restrictions that made immediate access impossible. Time was slipping away, and with each passing hour, the pressure intensified. The news media, ever vigilant for a royal scandal, began to report on the bill immediately. Headlines screamed across social media: Prince Harry's title stripped, forced to pay $700,000 tax within 48 hours, royal rebellion. Sussexes face unprecedented financial demand. And can Harry meet the deadline? Each story was accompanied by a mixture of commentary and speculation, much of it questioning Harry's ability to respond in time. The public's fascination with royal drama meant that every move, every delay, and every decision was being scrutinized. For Harry, the relentless attention added a layer of psychological pressure that made the financial demand feel almost secondary to the public spectacle. Meghan, observing Harry's growing agitation, realized that this was a critical moment not only for their finances, but for their relationship. She stepped in, not with criticism, but with strategies, outlining the most efficient ways to marshal their resources. She suggested immediate liquidation of certain investments, renegotiation of contracts, and even reaching out to trusted allies in Hollywood who could expedite funds if necessary. Each suggestion was calculated, precise, and driven by the urgency of the 48-hour deadline. Meghan's demeanor was calm, almost clinical, a stark contrast to Harry's rising frustration. As the countdown continued, the couple's daily routines became a whirlwind of action. Mornings were spent in urgent conference calls, reviewing financial statements and confirming transfers. Afternoons were devoted to media management, drafting statements that could be released to preempt speculation, while evenings were reserved for strategy sessions where every possible contingency was mapped out in painstaking detail. Sleep became fragmented, a series of short, restless bursts that left both of them exhausted yet unable to stop, because every minute mattered. The psychological toll was immense. Harry's anger and fear oscillated unpredictably, sometimes erupting in sharp words during tense discussions, other times manifesting as brooding silence. Meghan's focus, while steady, was driven by a mixture of anxiety and determination. Friends close to the couple described the atmosphere as high-stakes, relentless, and tense, noting that the 48-hour window had transformed their home into a pressure cooker of financial, emotional, and public stress. Despite the strain, there were moments of unexpected clarity. Harry, reflecting on his situation, realized that the crisis demanded not only financial solutions, but also public positioning. How he responded in these 48 hours would define him in the eyes of both the British public and the international community. Each decision was symbolic, a demonstration of resilience, resourcefulness, and the ability to navigate a world where titles and privilege could no longer shield him from reality. The clock was relentless. Every hour brought new calculations, new transfers, and new interactions with advisors who were equally frantic. The couple coordinated across time zones, contacting banks in London, investment firms in New York, and financial intermediaries in Los Angeles. Each communication carried the weight of potential failure, and each delay could have catastrophic consequences. The pressure was not abstract. It was immediate, tangible, and inescapable. Throughout it all, the media continued to escalate the narrative. Royal commentators debated endlessly on television and social media platforms, analyzing every potential outcome and questioning whether Harry could meet the deadline. Some suggested that failure would irreparably damage his public image, while others speculated that he might be forced to liquidate cherished assets or even compromise personal projects to satisfy the tax demand. The relentless scrutiny meant that Harry and Meghan were not only managing a financial crisis, but also performing under the global gaze, a pressure few could comprehend fully. As the countdown entered its final hours, tension reached a fever pitch. Harry, who had been methodically executing the plans laid out in the previous day, now faced the ultimate test. Every phone call, every wire transfer, every document signed carried the weight of consequence. Meghan remained by his side, offering advice, encouragement, and, when necessary, a stern reminder of the time ticking away. Together, they navigated a high-stakes maze of deadlines, public perception, and personal emotion, each step critical to ensuring that the Sussex name emerged intact from what could easily have been a humiliating debacle. As the tension of the 48-hour countdown intensified, Harry and Meghan realized that they could not navigate the storm alone. The Sussexes began reaching out to allies. Trusted advisors, former royal aides, and influential friends, people who had previously supported them in moments of public scrutiny or legal complexity. Each call, each email, each text was calculated, designed to leverage relationships that could provide both financial solutions and strategic guidance. Yet, for every ally who offered assistance, there seemed to be another who either hesitated or outright refused to intervene, leaving Harry and Meghan acutely aware of how isolation could magnify their vulnerability. Behind the scenes, the corridors of power in London were buzzing with activity. UK MPs involved in drafting the removal of titles bill had long anticipated the consequences it would trigger, but few predicted the immediate chaos of Harry being forced to pay $700,000 in such a short window. Some parliamentarians celebrated what they called a moment of accountability, while others expressed concern about the optics, especially given the global fascination with the royal family. Analysts speculated about potential backlash, both from the public who sympathized with Harry and from those who relished the drama. Every statement, every leak, and every report had a purpose, whether deliberate or incidental, in shaping the narrative of power, consequence, and spectacle. Amid this politically charged environment, Harry felt the sting of personal betrayal. Longtime acquaintances and even distant relatives were suddenly distant, reluctant to be seen assisting someone under official scrutiny. Reports circulated in tabloid outlets suggesting that some royal insiders were quietly undermining Harry's efforts, perhaps seeking to expedite his downfall or to assert their loyalty to the crown. Each piece of gossip, each whispered speculation, acted as a psychological pressure point, testing Harry's focus, his resolve, and his ability to separate actionable advice from noise. Meanwhile, Meghan's role became more critical than ever. She acted as both strategist and morale officer, evaluating each potential ally for reliability and discretion. Using a combination of legal insight and social acumen, she identified which contacts could expedite financial transfers without drawing unwanted attention and which public figures might lend credibility or moral support if the media narrative turned hostile. Meghan's ability to analyze, adapt, and anticipate potential setbacks allowed Harry to focus on executing the plan itself, but it also underscored how much this crisis relied on interpersonal networks and unseen influences outside of their immediate control. The media, relentless in its coverage, amplified the stakes. Breaking news alerts detailed every minor action, calls made, meetings scheduled, and statements prepared. Headlines alternated between sympathy and sensationalism, leaving the couple navigating not just a financial crisis, but a global narrative that seemed to have a life of its own. Social media platforms were flooded with speculation, memes, and emotional reactions from fans and critics alike, turning Harry's 48-hour countdown into a public spectacle that was as much about perception as it was about actual payment. In the midst of this chaos, unknown forces began to emerge, adding layers of complexity that neither Harry nor Meghan could fully anticipate. Insider leaks hinted at discussions within financial institutions about delaying or restricting transfers, while anonymous sources suggested that certain media outlets were coordinating with political operatives to heighten pressure. These unseen forces created a maze of potential pitfalls, each decision carrying consequences that were as reputational as they were financial. The couple had to navigate not only legal and logistical hurdles, but also a battlefield shaped by rumor, speculation, and strategic maneuvering by entities whose motives were opaque. Despite these obstacles, the Sussexes remained proactive. Harry leveraged his public platform to subtly influence narratives, scheduling interviews and statements that emphasized responsibility, resilience, and the urgency of the situation without revealing sensitive details. Meghan worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating financial logistics, negotiating with advisors, and ensuring that every action aligned with their broader strategy. Their combined effort created a delicate balance, a public image of calm and control, countering a private reality of high-stakes tension, late nights, and relentless problem-solving. Amid the pressure, there were moments of vulnerability and reflection. Harry, isolated from the protective buffer of his former royal life, began to confront the true implications of losing formal titles and the privileges that accompanied them. Meghan, recognizing the psychological weight, provided both strategic guidance and emotional support, reinforcing the notion that their unity was their greatest asset. These personal dynamics underscored a broader truth. While financial obligations could be quantified, the emotional and relational stakes of this crisis were far more complex and enduring. Chapter 6 also highlights the unseen adversaries who shaped the context of the crisis. From political operatives to media strategists, the forces arrayed against the couple were formidable, requiring both tactical precision and emotional resilience. Harry and Meghan's ability to navigate these forces would be tested not just in the execution of financial transactions, but in maintaining coherence, composure, and credibility under global scrutiny. As the countdown moved into its final hours, the interplay of allies, enemies, and unseen forces became increasingly evident. Each decision carried heightened significance. Every misstep risked exposure, delay, or public embarrassment. The Sussexes had to operate with relentless focus, drawing on strategy, relationships, and psychological endurance to ensure they could meet the looming deadline. The narrative of Chapter 6 sets the stage for the critical maneuvers and decisive actions that would define the final hours of this high-stakes episode. With the allies aligned and the obstacles mapped, Harry and Meghan entered the final phase of the 48-hour countdown. Time had become an unforgiving adversary, each passing hour magnifying the pressure and shrinking the margin for error. Early on, Harry had underestimated how logistical complexities, bureaucratic red tape, and media scrutiny would converge, creating a situation that demanded both rapid decision-making and meticulous attention to detail. Every movement, every phone call, every transaction had to be synchronized precisely, as any misstep could trigger cascading consequences that would endanger both their financial and public standing. As the hours ticked down, the sense of urgency became palpable. Harry monitored bank accounts, confirming that funds were accessible and could be transferred immediately. He cross-referenced legal obligations, ensuring that the payment could not be legally challenged or delayed. Meghan coordinated with advisors, making rapid adjustments to align the payment process with legal requirements and time constraints. Their combined efforts resembled a high-stakes military operation, with each individual playing a specialized role to ensure the mission's success. The tension was compounded by the knowledge that millions of eyes were observing their actions, waiting for any sign of faltering. Simultaneously, the media amplified the pressure, with news outlets reporting on every development in real time. Headlines alternated between sympathetic portrayals of Harry as a beleaguered figure and critical pieces highlighting his perceived failures. Social media, unfiltered and instantaneous, became a battlefield of its own, with public opinion swinging like a pendulum between support and condemnation. The Sussexes had to navigate this relentless scrutiny while remaining focused on the immediate task, transferring $700,000 within the legally mandated 48 hours. Each distraction carried the potential to disrupt the delicate balance of timing and compliance. Legal advisors provided continuous updates, highlighting potential pitfalls and contingency measures. They stressed the importance of not only meeting the payment requirement, but documenting every step to prevent any future disputes. This added an additional layer of complexity, as Harry and Meghan had to ensure that their actions were transparent and verifiable without exposing sensitive financial information to public view. The stakes extended beyond the immediate crisis, encompassing reputational risk, potential legal consequences, and the broader narrative of their relationship with the monarchy and the UK government. Amid this whirlwind, Harry grappled with intense personal reflection. The countdown forced him to confront not only the immediate financial obligation, but the broader implications of losing his royal title and privileges. He considered how the public would interpret his actions, how critics might frame his compliance, and how allies could be affected by the ripple effects of any misstep. These reflections were not merely strategic. They carried deep emotional weight, as Harry faced the stark reality of navigating a world where his previous protections and status were no longer guaranteed. Meghan, attuned to both the practical and psychological dimensions of the crisis, worked tirelessly to maintain focus and composure. She anticipated challenges before they arose, prepared alternative strategies, and managed the flow of information to ensure that Harry remained informed but not overwhelmed. Their dynamic became a study in high-pressure collaboration, Harry as executor, Meghan as strategist, both reinforcing each other's strengths while mitigating vulnerabilities. The intensity of the countdown revealed the depth of their partnership, highlighting resilience, trust, and mutual reliance in the face of unprecedented stress. The final 12 hours saw a convergence of all elements. Financial transactions had to be finalized, legal documentation secured, media narratives managed, and strategic communications prepared to address potential fallout. Every advisor, every ally, every technical detail had to be perfectly aligned to achieve compliance within the limited window. The suspense was heightened by the knowledge that failure was not an abstract possibility but a concrete, immediate risk with far-reaching consequences. Unexpected complications emerged as the clock continued its relentless march. Delays in banking clearance, last-minute verification requirements, and the need to reconcile discrepancies in transaction records created moments of acute tension. Harry and Meghan had to respond swiftly, relying on contingency plans developed over the previous 48 hours. These interventions required precision, composure, and the ability to anticipate further complications, as any error could result in missed deadlines or legal exposure. Public speculation intensified as reports circulated that certain factions within the government were closely monitoring each step. Analysts debated the potential for punitive measures beyond the immediate financial demand, with some suggesting that future restrictions on titles, privileges, or public appearances could be imminent. These conjectures, whether accurate or not, amplified the psychological weight of the countdown, forcing Harry and Meghan to consider not only the immediate transfer of funds, but the broader implications for their public image and ongoing relationship with the crown. In the final hours, a sense of disciplined urgency dominated their actions. Harry focused on execution, meticulously verifying account details, authorization codes, and transfer confirmations. Meghan ensured that communications with advisors were precise, that legal documentation was complete, and that contingency measures were ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Their coordinated effort was relentless, a high-stakes operation unfolding under intense public scrutiny, where timing, accuracy, and composure were the keys to success. As the countdown edged into its final hour, the atmosphere surrounding Harry and Meghan became almost unbearable. The tension, which had been steadily building over the previous 47 hours, now reached a nearly tangible peak. Advisors moved quickly, checking, double-checking, and triple-checking every document, account number, and legal form to ensure that no error could jeopardize the delicate process. Every step had to be flawless. Any minor mistake could trigger a cascade of consequences that would ripple far beyond the immediate tax payment. Harry, sitting in his private study with lines of concern etched across his face, had never felt pressure like this before. The reality of paying $700,000 within 48 hours, combined with the loss of his royal protections and privileges, was a stark reminder of the precarious balance he now maintained between personal autonomy and the expectations of public life. He could feel the weight of scrutiny pressing down on him from every angle: government authorities, media outlets, social media commentators, and even his own inner circle. Each of these forces contributed to a sense of suffocating immediacy. Meghan, seated across from him, maintained a calm exterior, yet the sharpness of her focus betrayed the storm of calculations running through her mind. She monitored the financial flows, liaised with legal counsel, and ensured that every contingency plan was ready to deploy if needed. She had always understood the power of perception and timing, but this moment demanded not only strategic foresight, but also flawless execution. Every misstep could become a headline, every delay a narrative weapon in the court of public opinion. External pressures mounted as well. The press, privy to leaks from government sources, had begun publishing updates on the situation. Headlines ranged from sympathetic interpretations highlighting Harry's plight to scathing critiques emphasizing his perceived irresponsibility. Social media amplified every report, comment, and speculation, creating a constant feedback loop of public opinion that made it impossible for the Sussexes to operate without awareness of external perception. Every move had to account not only for compliance with the law, but for the optics of their actions, knowing that the world was watching every moment unfold. Internally, the team worked in an orchestrated frenzy. Financial advisors coordinated wire transfers, ensuring that all verifications were met and that the payment could be traced and documented to prevent disputes. Legal advisors scrutinized every signature and document, confirming that all procedural requirements had been met. Communications staff prepared statements that could be released instantly if any unforeseen complications arose, aiming to manage the narrative and protect the couple's public standing. Each participant functioned as part of a high-stakes, synchronized operation where precision and timing were crucial. The hours and minutes seemed to compress into a relentless torrent. The realization that there was no room for error created a psychological pressure almost unbearable to bear. Harry's thoughts oscillated between anxiety and determination, while Meghan's mind worked methodically, anticipating obstacles and calculating solutions. It was a delicate dance between reaction and anticipation, requiring every ounce of focus and resilience. Unexpected hurdles emerged even in this final hour. A verification call from the bank took longer than anticipated, and one document required an additional signature to comply with updated legal stipulations. These minor delays, while manageable, intensified the feeling of urgency and tested the couple's ability to remain composed under extreme pressure. Quick decisions had to be made, and trust in each other's judgment became more critical than ever. Despite these obstacles, a sense of unity strengthened between Harry and Meghan. They communicated in concise, deliberate exchanges, anticipating each other's needs and adjusting strategies in real time. The intensity of the moment forced them to operate as a single entity, balancing the strategic, operational, and emotional demands of the situation. The synergy between them became the backbone of the final effort, reinforcing their resilience against the mounting pressures. Public perception remained an ever-present concern. Leaks continued to trickle into media outlets, some sympathetic, some critical, creating a complex landscape of reputation management. The couple's team had to carefully craft responses that would be immediate enough to control narratives without compromising financial or legal strategy. This required an intricate balance of transparency and discretion, a skillful navigation of optics that could easily sway public sentiment in moments of heightened visibility. In the final 30 minutes, the tension became almost unbearable. Every confirmation ping from the bank, every document approved by a legal authority, carried immense weight. The culmination of 48 hours of relentless effort was now visible in these final moments, as the mechanisms put in place earlier in the crisis began to align, inching Harry and Meghan closer to the completion of their monumental obligation. The clock had officially struck the final hour, and with it, a tense stillness descended upon the Sussex residence. Inside, Harry and Meghan sat side by side, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion, anticipation, and steely determination. For 48 hours, They had navigated an unprecedented storm of public scrutiny, financial obligations, and legal maneuvering. Now, every calculation, every carefully considered decision, culminated in a single, defining moment: the payment of $700,000 to the United Kingdom Treasury, an act that would symbolically and materially mark a new chapter in their lives. The financial team, spread across multiple screens and lines of communication, monitored the transfer in real time. Each digital confirmation felt like a heartbeat, each ping a pulse of life moving through a vast, interconnected system of banks and governmental accounts. For Harry, the process was not just about dollars and cents. It was about accountability, about reclaiming some measure of dignity in the face of relentless criticism. He thought back to the early days of his independence from royal privileges, recalling moments when the weight of legacy, expectation, and personal desire collided in ways he had never imagined possible. Meghan, ever composed, guided the team through the final verifications. Her mind worked in precise, deliberate steps, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. Every digital signature, every encryption verification, and every procedural compliance measure was double-checked and cross-checked. She knew that one minor oversight could unravel the painstaking efforts of the past 2 days. As she reviewed the final confirmations, her gaze met Harry's, and in that silent exchange, a sense of shared triumph and relief began to emerge. Outside the walls of the residence, the world waited. The media had stationed cameras near key royal locations, live streams captured every reported detail, and social media feeds exploded with speculation, anticipation, and in many cases, judgment. The story of Harry being forced to pay an extraordinary sum within a rigid deadline had captured the imagination of millions, blending elements of royalty, accountability, and public spectacle into a narrative that seemed almost theatrical in its intensity. Each moment, every decision, and every confirmation was now magnified by the relentless eye of public attention. The first notification came through the encrypted line of communication with the Treasury. The initial transfer had been received and verified. A collective breath was held in the room. Harry exhaled slowly, feeling a subtle but profound shift in the energy around him. This was more than a financial transaction. It was a tangible acknowledgement of responsibility, an act that connected him directly to the mechanisms of governance from which he had been partially insulated as a royal figure. Minutes passed as the remaining balance moved through the system. The digital ledger updated in real time, and advisors confirmed that every cent had been accounted for. Legal counsel provided their final nod of approval, ensuring that all documentation was complete and that no procedural errors could later be contested. Each confirmation sent waves of relief through the room, yet the gravity of the situation prevented any premature celebration. Every step had been measured, calculated, and intentional, reflecting the immense pressure that had defined the past 48 hours. The public narrative, meanwhile, was evolving rapidly. Social media exploded with live commentary, memes, and instant analysis. News outlets published breaking headlines, some emphasizing Harry's compliance, others framing it as a reluctant concession to governmental authority. Commentary ranged from sympathetic portrayals highlighting the unprecedented nature of the tax demand to critical assessments questioning the timing and execution of his financial independence. Each narrative, whether supportive or critical, added layers of complexity to the emotional landscape Harry and Meghan were navigating. In the final moments, Harry took a deep breath and reflected on the journey that had led to this point. He thought of the public scrutiny, the media speculation, the complex dynamics within the royal family, and the personal toll of living under constant observation. He acknowledged the mistakes of the past, the lessons learned, and the resilience cultivated through adversity. This payment was not just an act of compliance. It was a statement of agency, a declaration that despite the constraints imposed by public expectation and institutional structures, he could take responsibility for his own affairs. Meghan, sensing the weight of the moment, offered a quiet word of encouragement. Their partnership, forged through shared experiences of scrutiny and challenge, had been a stabilizing force throughout the ordeal. Together, they had navigated an almost unimaginable confluence of financial, legal, and emotional pressures, and now, in the final hour, they stood on the precipice of resolution. At exactly 11:59 p.m., the final confirmation arrived. The $700,000 had been successfully transferred and verified by the Treasury. A wave of relief, almost electric in its intensity, surged through the room. The countdown that had dominated the past 2 days was complete. Harry and Meghan allowed themselves a brief moment to absorb the significance of the achievement. It was a victory not measured in grandeur or public acclaim, but in the quiet satisfaction of accountability fulfilled under extraordinary circumstances. The moment the final confirmation of the $700,000 payment hit the Treasury's digital ledger, the world outside erupted in a mixture of astonishment, criticism, and intrigue. News outlets immediately seized upon the story, headlines flashing across screens with varying degrees of outrage, sympathy, and sensationalism. Prince Harry forced to pay $700,000 tax within 48 hours, read one major British newspaper. Across social media, the narrative spread like wildfire, with users dissecting every aspect of the payment, speculating about its implications for Harry, Meghan, and the broader royal family. Within minutes, analysts began breaking down the event, offering insights into the unprecedented nature of the governmental demand. Financial experts highlighted the unusual speed and precision required to execute such a substantial transfer under a strict deadline, noting that even seasoned business leaders would struggle with the logistical and legal complexities involved. The public was informed that Harry had acted swiftly and decisively, ensuring that no errors occurred that might have led to legal repercussions or further scrutiny. Despite the technical success of the transaction, public opinion was far from unanimous. Some commentators applauded Harry's compliance, framing it as a sign of responsibility and transparency. These voices emphasized that, despite his sometimes controversial public persona and strained relations with the royal family, he had stepped up when accountability demanded it. A royal learning the hard lessons of financial independence, read one op-ed, highlighting the narrative of growth, responsibility, and adaptation under extraordinary pressure. Other narratives, however, took a harsher tone. Critics framed the payment as evidence of prior financial mismanagement or questioned why such a significant sum had not been accounted for sooner. Social media became a battleground of opinions, with hashtags trending that ranged from sympathetic support to scathing critique. Memes circulated depicting Harry rushing through digital banking interfaces, clock ticking ominously in the background, a metaphor for the scrutiny and judgment he faced from a world that had watched his every move for decades. Political voices also weighed in. Some members of Parliament praised the swift resolution, noting that it reinforced public trust in the accountability of figures with royal lineage, even when they live outside traditional royal privilege. Others questioned whether the timing and method of enforcement were appropriate, highlighting the delicate balance between public expectation, legal authority, and the autonomy of individuals no longer fully embedded within the monarchy's institutional structures. In the midst of this public maelstrom, the royal family itself remained largely silent, issuing no immediate comment beyond the formal acknowledgement of the payment's receipt. This silence, while carefully calculated, fueled speculation. Was this tacit approval a strategic retreat from commentary, or a sign of deeper tensions? Analysts and royal watchers debated endlessly, considering historical precedents and the subtle cues that had often defined interactions within the monarchy. Every gesture, or lack thereof, was dissected for hidden meaning. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan experienced the fallout in real time. Their private team monitored media coverage, public sentiment, and social media trends, analyzing patterns and preparing for the inevitable inquiries, requests for interviews, and potential follow-up scrutiny. Harry felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Relief that the financial obligation had been met without error, exhaustion from the relentless intensity of public and media attention. Meghan, ever strategic, coordinated communications, ensuring that the narrative conveyed both accountability and resilience without appearing defensive or reactive. Within elite social circles, reactions were equally varied. Close friends and associates sent messages of support, acknowledging the extraordinary pressure Harry and Meghan had endured. Others, particularly those within traditionalist royalist networks, expressed concern over the precedent set by such a public financial mandate. Conversations ranged from private discussions over dinner tables to high-level diplomatic commentary, reflecting the complex web of social, political, and familial relationships that this incident had activated. The payment also prompted a surge of public reflection on the broader implications for royal finances, inheritance, and independence. Commentators drew parallels to other royal figures who had faced financial challenges, examining how public expectation, taxation, and private wealth intersected. Discussions emerged regarding transparency, fairness, and the responsibilities that come with privilege, sparking debates that extended far beyond the immediate case of Harry's payment. Despite the external chaos, Harry and Meghan found a brief moment to assess the personal impact of the crisis. They recognized that the incident, while stressful and highly publicized, represented a significant turning point. The act of fulfilling such a substantial financial obligation under duress had reinforced their capacity for resilience, careful planning, and strategic decision-making. It also highlighted the intensity of the scrutiny they faced and the extraordinary lengths required to navigate both public expectation and private accountability. The public narrative continued to evolve over the following hours. Media outlets reported on minor details, such as the methods used to expedite the transfer, the involvement of multiple financial and legal advisors, and the intricate coordination with Treasury officials. Experts weighed in on the unusual speed of compliance, noting that even standard corporate practices rarely demanded such rapid execution of a transaction of this magnitude. Analysts also speculated on potential long-term consequences, including how this payment might influence future financial obligations, legal expectations, and public perception of the couple. Through it all, the human dimension remained central. Harry and Meghan's emotional journey, marked by stress, anticipation, and eventual relief, resonated with many observers. While much of the public discourse focused on numbers, deadlines, and legal intricacies, the underlying story was deeply personal. Two individuals navigating extraordinary pressures, managing complex responsibilities, and maintaining composure in the face of unprecedented scrutiny. Their experience served as a lens through which the public could explore broader themes of accountability, privilege, and resilience. As the initial shock of the news subsided, the story took on new layers of analysis. Some media outlets emphasized the symbolic nature of the payment, framing it as a watershed moment in Harry's post-royal life, a public acknowledgement of responsibility and autonomy. Others continued to scrutinize the couple's actions, questioning motives, timing, and broader implications for the monarchy and public trust. The narrative was dynamic, fluid, and emotionally charged, reflecting both the public's fascination with royal figures and the extraordinary circumstances surrounding the financial mandate. In the quiet halls of the royal estates, far from the cacophony of media frenzy and social media speculation, a smaller, more discreet storm was unfolding. Advisors, legal counsel, and private secretaries convened in hushed meetings, poring over documents, correspondence, and precedent cases to navigate the delicate fallout from Harry's mandated payment. The air was thick with tension, an almost tangible sense of urgency as advisors worked to reconcile the public narrative with internal royal expectations. Each decision carried weight, not just financially, but politically, socially, and emotionally. Harry's financial maneuvering had not only captured public attention, but had also activated layers of royal bureaucracy that rarely interacted so directly with matters involving former working royals. Every figure involved, from the most seasoned financial advisors to the youngest members of the legal team, was acutely aware that missteps could result in a cascade of complications. The sheer scale of the $700,000 transfer required precision, coordination, and foresight. Advisors were tasked not only with facilitating the payment, but also with preparing contingency plans in case of technical issues, public backlash, or misinterpretation by media outlets. Discussions focused heavily on risk management. Each advisor had a checklist of potential challenges: errors in transaction processing, discrepancies in public reporting, questions from Parliament or financial regulators, and the unpredictable reaction of the public. Every scenario was considered meticulously. One advisor suggested a detailed press briefing to preempt speculation, while another emphasized the importance of maintaining a controlled narrative without revealing sensitive financial details. The delicate balance between transparency and discretion became a central point of debate. Royal financial strategy was another critical focus. Advisors reviewed Harry's assets, expenditures, and projected income to assess his ability to meet the mandated deadline without jeopardizing other obligations. There was a careful examination of liquidity, cash flow, and potential sources of immediate funds. The strategic deployment of assets had to be flawless, ensuring the Treasury's expectations were met while protecting Harry's financial security. One point of discussion revolved around the optics of liquidating assets or drawing from investments, which could be misconstrued as desperation or financial instability if publicized. As advisors deliberated, the personal dimension of the situation remained central. Emotional intelligence played a key role in strategic planning. Harry's advisors had to anticipate not only legal and financial challenges, but also the psychological impact of the situation on him and Meghan. They considered the stress of operating under such intense public scrutiny, the strain on private relationships, and the potential for emotional fatigue to affect decision-making. Meetings often included quiet, almost invisible adjustments to schedules, breaks for reflection, and moments of personal check-ins to ensure the couple could maintain clarity and composure. One of the most challenging aspects involved navigating the blurred lines between Harry's independence and lingering obligations to the crown. Advisors debated the implications of his post-royal status, particularly how financial accountability intersected with residual privileges and public perception. There was concern that any misstep could be amplified by both traditionalist and sensationalist media narratives, potentially influencing public opinion, royal family dynamics, and future engagements. The team worked tirelessly to craft strategies that would safeguard Harry's autonomy while minimizing friction with institutional expectations. Coordination with external experts became a necessity. Tax consultants, banking officials, and legal analysts outside the immediate royal circle were consulted to ensure compliance and accuracy. Their input helped refine timing, transaction methods, and contingency planning. Each decision was layered with complexity. A wrong step could provoke parliamentary inquiry, spark public outrage, or create long-lasting reputational damage. Advisors often worked late into the night, running simulations, reviewing past cases, and preparing responses for potential inquiries. Public communication strategy remained a point of constant refinement. Advisors knew that Harry's every move would be dissected not only by journalists, but also by social media users, commentators, and political figures. Messaging had to be precise, emotionally resonant, and legally sound. The language used in statements or announcements required careful calibration, ensuring that it conveyed responsibility without appearing defensive or reactive. Even minor wording choices were analyzed in detail, as misinterpretation could ignite controversy. Meanwhile, Meghan's role in strategic planning was significant. Known for her meticulous approach to media relations and public perception, she provided insights into messaging, optics, and timing. Her guidance extended beyond communication into broader considerations: how to present compliance as a sign of integrity, how to maintain public sympathy without appearing overly constrained, and how to reinforce Harry's agency while navigating the realities of public scrutiny. Their collaboration became a cornerstone of the strategic response, balancing practical compliance with emotional resonance and public narrative control. Royal advisors also grappled with the precedent set by this unprecedented event. The speed and scale of the mandated payment, combined with the public nature of the story, required careful consideration of long-term implications for the monarchy and former royals. Discussions extended to policies surrounding transparency, accountability, and financial independence for members of the royal family who had stepped back from official duties. Strategists weighed whether Harry's case would influence future expectations, legal mandates, and public tolerance for deviations from established protocols. Throughout the process, tension coexisted with meticulous professionalism. Advisors maintained constant communication with Harry and Meghan, providing updates, strategic options, and expert recommendations. The couple's engagement with the process was active and deliberate, reflecting an understanding that success depended on precise execution, timely decisions, and alignment between private action and public perception. The culmination of this strategic orchestration was both practical and symbolic. The payment was executed flawlessly, with every advisor's efforts contributing to the seamless transfer. Beyond the technical achievement, the process demonstrated the power of coordinated strategy, foresight, and emotional intelligence in navigating high-stakes scenarios. It underscored the complex realities of modern royalty, where financial obligations, public expectation, and personal autonomy collide in ways that demand both tactical skill and psychological resilience. As news of Prince Harry's forced payment of $700,000 within 48 hours broke across headlines, the world seemed to pause for a moment, collectively leaning into the story that was unfolding. From London to Los Angeles, from tabloids to global news networks, every outlet scrambled to dissect, analyze, and dramatize the events. The media frenzy was immediate and relentless. Within minutes, social media platforms were flooded with trending hashtags, speculative commentary, and viral clips of pundits dissecting every possible angle of the unfolding situation. Traditional media outlets were equally unrelenting. Newspapers splashed bold headlines with phrases designed to shock, provoke, and attract maximum attention. Television news channels dedicated entire segments to expert panels debating the implications of Harry's rapid financial obligation. Clips of political analysts, former royal correspondents, and financial experts were interwoven to create a narrative that combined drama, scandal, and speculation. The story quickly transformed from a financial matter into a spectacle of public intrigue, a case study in how modern media could amplify every nuance of high-profile events. The public reaction was as diverse as it was intense. On one side, loyalists and royal supporters expressed shock and sympathy, framing Harry as a victim of bureaucratic overreach and institutional rigidity. Comments flooded forums emphasizing the unfairness of the accelerated payment and questioning whether such demands were appropriate for a former working royal. Many argued that the Crown's insistence on the payment timeline disregarded personal circumstances and reflected a rigid adherence to tradition over empathy. Emotional appeals circulated online, highlighting Harry's service, public contributions, and philanthropic work, suggesting that such accomplishments warranted more leniency and understanding. On the other side, critics were equally vocal, framing the incident as a symbol of accountability, finally catching up to a royal figure who had often been perceived as living beyond typical societal rules. Discussions erupted around fairness, taxation, and the responsibilities of public figures, with some commentators arguing that Harry's status should not exempt him from obligations that ordinary citizens face daily. Opinion pieces dissected past financial privileges, expenditures, and alleged tax minimization strategies, weaving a narrative of accountability intertwined with social expectation. The juxtaposition of sympathy and criticism created a polarized public discourse, where every comment, post, and article fueled ongoing debate. Social media became a particularly volatile arena. Tweets, Instagram posts, TikTok videos, and Facebook threads exploded with reactionary content, ranging from memes to passionate opinion threads. Hashtags calling for deeper transparency trended alongside hashtags defending Harry and questioning the ethics of rapid payment enforcement. Influencers and celebrity commentators lent their voices to the discussion, amplifying narratives and stirring engagement among millions of followers. Viral clips of Harry attending public events or charitable activities were juxtaposed with articles detailing financial obligations, creating a tension between public persona and private accountability that captivated audiences worldwide. News outlets took particular interest in the political dimensions of the story. Analysts debated whether the UK Parliament's move to impose strict timelines was indicative of broader governmental intent, scrutinizing potential motivations and implications. Was this an isolated case or a signal of tightening oversight on former royals and their financial entitlements? Political talk shows dissected every detail, speculating about internal pressures, parliamentary debates, and possible future legislative measures. Commentary extended to questions about precedent and whether Harry's case would reshape policies regarding accountability and taxation for high-profile individuals, sparking a cascade of analytical reports and opinion editorials. The media frenzy extended beyond news coverage into public commentary and debate on ethics, morality, and societal standards. Panels explored themes of privilege, responsibility, and the balance between personal freedom and institutional expectations. Academic voices weighed in on historical precedent, comparing Harry's situation with prior instances of royal financial disputes. Experts in public policy and law dissected the nuances of taxation timelines, legal obligations, and the enforceability of accelerated payments, providing context that was both informative and loaded with tension. Amid this swirl of coverage, the emotional dimension of public reaction was palpable. Individuals who identified with Harry's struggles expressed empathy, sharing personal anecdotes of financial stress, rapid deadlines, and institutional rigidity. Many wrote letters to editors or posted heartfelt social media reflections about the human cost of rigid bureaucratic measures. In parallel, detractors highlighted their own experiences with financial accountability, emphasizing that no one, regardless of fame or lineage, should be exempt from legal and financial responsibilities. The clash of personal narratives intensified the conversation, creating a dynamic, multifaceted discourse that extended far beyond the initial headlines. The impact on Harry and Meghan was immediate and tangible. Media scrutiny became a constant presence, shadowing their movements, appearances, and communications. Every statement was analyzed for tone, implication, and intent. Even private moments were subject to public dissection, with paparazzi coverage amplifying the sense of intrusion and pressure. Advisors, legal teams, and media strategists worked in concert to manage perception, issue clarifications, and ensure that messaging remained aligned with their broader objectives. The stakes of every public engagement, interview, or statement were suddenly magnified, reflecting the profound influence of media dynamics on personal and institutional narratives. In parallel, international coverage brought additional layers of complexity. Global audiences, unfamiliar with the intricacies of British royal protocols but captivated by the scandal and financial drama, engaged with the story through translated articles, commentary videos, and social media adaptations. Analysts drew parallels to financial accountability issues in other nations, framing Harry's situation within a global context of wealth, privilege, and responsibility. The cross-cultural conversation emphasized the universality of themes such as fairness, duty, and consequence, demonstrating that the story's reach extended far beyond the immediate royal family or British public discourse. The public outcry also prompted reactions from figures within the royal institution. Subtle statements, measured responses, and carefully orchestrated appearances were designed to convey stability, fairness, and institutional integrity. While no official declaration was made regarding Harry's personal compliance, the optics of calm and controlled response served to stabilize perceptions and signal continuity. Royal communications teams worked behind the scenes to ensure that the narrative remained coherent, mitigating potential misinterpretations while reinforcing themes of accountability, tradition, and respect for procedure. Throughout this media storm, the narrative arc evolved rapidly. Initial shock transformed into analysis, analysis morphed into debate, and debate deepened into sustained public engagement. The story's emotional gravity intensified as individual voices, supporters, critics, analysts, and observers intertwined to create a rich tapestry of perspectives. Harry's financial obligations, initially a matter of personal compliance, became a symbolic focal point for broader societal discourse on privilege, responsibility, and the interplay between personal choice and institutional expectation. As the shockwaves from the media frenzy continued to reverberate around the globe, Prince Harry and his legal team faced the daunting reality of navigating a high-stakes financial and political minefield. The 48-hour deadline to pay $700,000 was more than a mere financial obligation. It was a test of strategic acumen, legal foresight, and emotional resilience. Advisors immediately began evaluating every possible avenue, seeking a way to mitigate risk while maintaining Harry's public image and personal interests. Legal experts were quickly consulted to dissect the legislative framework underpinning the tax demand. Parliamentary bills, statutory provisions, and precedent cases were all scrutinized with meticulous attention to detail. Attorneys analyzed every line of the mandate, looking for procedural errors, ambiguities, or potential grounds for appeal. The team had to work with the clock ticking relentlessly, each hour intensifying pressure. Consultants emphasized that even minor oversights could result in significant penalties or reputational damage. Simultaneously, communications advisors worked in parallel to craft a narrative that balanced transparency with discretion. Messaging needed to project responsibility, compliance, and respect for legal processes, while also acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances. Public statements were carefully calibrated to prevent further media escalation, avoiding any language that could be construed as evasive, defiant, or dismissive. Every word mattered. Even casual comments in interviews or off-the-cuff remarks on social media were potential fodder for critics. The complexity of the situation was amplified by the intersection of multiple jurisdictions. Although the tax demand originated from the United Kingdom, Harry's residency, previous financial arrangements, and international investments introduced layers of complication. Advisors analyzed cross-border tax treaties, currency fluctuations, and timing constraints to ensure that any financial transfer adhered to both legal and procedural requirements. The legal strategy extended beyond mere compliance. It required anticipating potential challenges from multiple parties, including government authorities, auditors, and public watchdogs. In parallel, Harry's team evaluated negotiation tactics. Though the timeline was rigid, there were limited options to request extensions, clarifications, or phased payments. Legal counsel prepared for possible hearings, drafting arguments grounded in fairness, precedent, and proportionality. The goal was not only to meet the immediate financial obligation, but also to preserve Harry's long-term financial and reputational interests. Every meeting with officials was meticulously planned, with strategy sessions covering possible questions, counterarguments, and contingency plans. Financial planners played an equally critical role. They conducted rapid audits to identify the sources of funds, verify liquidity, and ensure seamless transfer without triggering additional scrutiny. Every transaction had to be documented, traceable, and compliant with both legal and ethical standards. The pressure was immense, as delays or errors could have severe consequences, not just financial, but also reputational. Advisors mapped out multiple scenarios, including partial payments, loans, or asset liquidation, each with calculated implications for public perception and private stability. During this period, Harry's inner circle became a tightly coordinated unit, operating under extraordinary stress. Meetings ran late into the night, conference calls spanned time zones, and documents were prepared, revised, and cross-checked multiple times. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of urgency and meticulous planning. Each advisor understood the stakes. A misstep could reverberate beyond Harry himself, potentially impacting family relationships, public confidence, and even the monarchy's broader image. Amid the procedural maneuvering, legal counsel also considered broader implications. Beyond the immediate financial demand, there were questions about precedent and institutional authority. How could this situation shape future expectations for royals who were no longer working members of the monarchy? Was the accelerated timeline a one-off measure, or was it indicative of a new approach toward accountability and oversight? Discussions with political analysts and legal scholars were integrated into the advisory process, ensuring that strategy encompassed not just immediate compliance, but also long-term positioning and public perception management. Harry's own involvement in these processes was significant. He was not a passive participant. His personal decisions, emotional resilience, and judgment were critical factors. Advisors observed that his ability to remain composed under scrutiny, absorb complex legal advice, and make rapid financial decisions would ultimately influence the outcome. Emotional intelligence, often overlooked in discussions of legality and finance, was now central to the unfolding drama. Harry had to balance public composure with private stress, maintaining confidence for himself and for those around him. At the same time, the team prepared for potential contingencies. If payment could not be made within the prescribed time frame, alternative legal strategies were mapped, including appeals, stays, or negotiations for mitigation. These preparations were not just theoretical. They required immediate readiness to execute if circumstances demanded. Each scenario carried different risks, timelines, and public messaging requirements. Advisors coordinated to ensure that no option would create a vulnerability that could be exploited by media, political opponents, or critics. The legal and strategic maneuvers also intersected with a broader consideration: public sentiment. Advisors recognized that narrative framing was as important as legal compliance. The optics of timely payment, respectful engagement with authorities, and proactive transparency could influence public perception positively, potentially turning a highly charged situation into a demonstration of accountability and integrity. Conversely, any perceived hesitation, error, or defensiveness could be amplified as evidence of irresponsibility or entitlement. Every action was measured against its potential impact on public opinion, social media discourse, and media coverage. As hours dwindled, Harry's team executed their plan with precision. Legal documents were filed, communications were coordinated, and financial transfers were carefully traced. Advisors remained on high alert, monitoring media, official responses, and social sentiment in real time. The intensity of coordination, combined with the complexity of the financial and legal landscape, highlighted the extraordinary pressures faced by high-profile individuals navigating public obligations under scrutiny. By the end of this chapter, the contours of Harry's legal strategy and financial maneuvering were fully drawn. The combination of rapid response legal counsel, meticulous financial planning, and coordinated communications provided a comprehensive framework to address the immediate challenge. Beyond the immediate payment, the experience illuminated the intricate balance between personal accountability, public perception, and strategic foresight in navigating high-stakes, high-visibility crises. As news of Prince Harry's enforced payment and the removal of his title bills reached the wider public, the intensity of scrutiny escalated exponentially. Headlines across newspapers, online media platforms, and television broadcasts carried variations of the same story, each emphasizing urgency, scandal, or moral judgment. The narrative became a feeding frenzy. Some portrayed the Duke as a figure finally being held accountable, while others depicted him as a victim of political overreach. Social media exploded with hashtags, debates, memes, and opinion threads, creating an environment where misinformation and speculation thrived alongside verified reporting. The immediacy of the news cycle meant that public perception could shift in hours, and Harry's team understood the criticality of managing narrative in real time. Analysts tracked sentiment, mapping reactions by region, demographic, and social strata. Discussions on political talk shows, podcasts, and celebrity commentary programs dissected every detail: the amount of money, the speed of the demanded payment, the implications for the monarchy, and the precedent it could set for other royal family members. Public opinion became a battleground of interpretation, with each comment, article, and tweet contributing to the evolving perception of the unfolding saga. For Harry, the media storm was more than background noise. It was a direct influence on both his personal and professional decisions. Advisors monitored the potential reputational impact of every leak and every story, preparing rapid responses for misrepresentations and preemptively addressing narratives that could harm public perception. This meant drafting statements, clarifying timelines, and strategically releasing selective information to counteract rumors. The coordination required constant vigilance, as any misstep in communication could be seized upon by critics and amplified across channels. Traditional media outlets played a pivotal role in shaping discourse. Print journalists and broadcast reporters focused on framing the narrative around themes of accountability, legacy, and royal privilege. Detailed timelines of Harry's financial history, prior charitable engagements, and public appearances were re-examined in light of the new tax demand. Analysts debated the fairness of the accelerated timeline, while political commentators speculated on whether the UK government's actions signaled a broader shift in treatment toward royals who had distanced themselves from official duties. Each article and segment contributed to a layered public understanding or misunderstanding of the events, blending fact, interpretation, and conjecture. Simultaneously, digital and social media amplified every nuance. Memes, short video clips, and comment threads became instruments of both ridicule and support, influencing perception in ways that traditional media could not entirely control. Supporters of Harry shared narratives emphasizing dedication to charitable causes and unfair treatment by authorities, while critics highlighted the perceived entitlement and extravagance of royal lifestyles. The speed at which narratives propagated created pressure to respond quickly, sometimes within minutes, underscoring the relentless pace of modern information dissemination. Public sentiment also revealed an emotional undercurrent that complicated the situation. Some expressed empathy for Harry, viewing him as an individual navigating extraordinary pressures, while others saw the circumstances as emblematic of larger issues of accountability and privilege. Polls conducted by media organizations reflected a divided opinion, with demographic factors influencing perspectives significantly. Younger audiences, often more engaged through social media, tended to focus on fairness and personal integrity, whereas older audiences gravitated toward tradition, royal duties, and societal obligations. The dichotomy in public opinion highlighted the challenge of navigating perception in an era where information is both instantaneous and fragmented. Within the media storm, narrative framing became an essential tool. Strategists identified key messages that could resonate with public sentiment while deflecting undue criticism. These included emphasizing Harry's proactive engagement with the payment process, highlighting charitable contributions and personal sacrifices, and contextualizing the accelerated timeline within a broader legal and procedural framework. Carefully curated interviews, press releases, and social media updates were deployed to humanize Harry and counteract narratives portraying him as merely reactive or entitled. At the same time, experts were called upon to provide analysis and lend credibility to the unfolding events. Political analysts, legal scholars, and financial commentators offered insights into the procedural aspects of the tax demand, evaluating the fairness of the legislation, the role of parliamentary authority, and the implications for financial accountability. These expert perspectives added depth to public discourse, allowing audiences to understand not only the immediate actions required of Harry, but also the broader significance for constitutional norms and royal governance. The media storm also had a direct impact on Harry's immediate environment. Family members, friends, and professional advisors found themselves under indirect scrutiny, with speculation about their influence, involvement, or opinions circulating publicly. Personal communications, social gatherings, and professional engagements were now potentially subject to interpretation, adding layers of complexity to decision-making. The emotional toll of navigating this highly visible crisis was palpable, requiring resilience, focus, and a strategic mindset to maintain composure and effectiveness. Throughout this period, the interplay between legal obligations and public perception became increasingly pronounced. While the $700,000 payment remained a concrete and time-sensitive task, the surrounding narrative was equally critical. Advisors recognized that managing the story effectively could mitigate reputational risk, prevent escalation, and position Harry in a manner that preserved long-term public trust. Every statement, action, and interaction with media was carefully orchestrated to maintain credibility while demonstrating responsiveness and accountability. By the time the 48-hour deadline loomed, the media landscape had transformed into a complex ecosystem of reporting, opinion, social commentary, and viral content. Harry's approach required navigating this ecosystem skillfully, balancing transparency with discretion, and engaging selectively to reinforce key messages. This chapter underscored the reality that in high-profile crises, legal compliance and public perception are inseparable, each influencing the other and shaping the ultimate outcome. The clock was ticking relentlessly, each second amplifying the pressure surrounding Prince Harry's mandated payment. With only hours remaining before the 48-hour window closed, every move was scrutinized, every decision weighed for potential consequences. In a scenario that combined legal urgency with public spectacle, the stakes were unprecedented, merging personal responsibility with royal scrutiny and media intensity. For Harry, the countdown was more than a numerical measure. It represented the culmination of weeks of tension, negotiation, and strategic maneuvering. Inside his residence, the atmosphere was charged with urgency. Advisors and legal counsel moved with precision, ensuring all financial pathways were validated and authorized. Communications with banks, accountants, and governmental officials were executed with meticulous attention to protocol, leaving no margin for error. Harry himself was a study in controlled determination, balancing focus and composure while grappling with the emotional weight of the situation. The interplay of personal pride, public expectation, and legal accountability created a complex psychological landscape that demanded constant vigilance. Externally, the world watched with bated breath. Media outlets provided real-time updates, tracking Harry's every step toward compliance. Headlines shifted hourly, reflecting developments in payments, statements, or reactions from governmental sources. Social media amplified the drama, with hashtags trending globally, live streams analyzing every gesture, and commentators speculating on potential outcomes. Public engagement reached a fever pitch as audiences debated fairness, responsibility, and the broader implications for monarchy and society alike. Financial logistics were intricate. Transferring $700,000 under such scrutiny required coordination across multiple institutions. International banking regulations, verification protocols, and reporting requirements had to be meticulously followed to ensure the transaction was legally sound and publicly defensible. Advisors provided step-by-step guidance, monitoring progress in real time and preemptively addressing any technical or procedural issues that might arise. Every confirmation, receipt, and acknowledgement was treated as a critical piece of evidence, establishing a transparent trail of compliance in anticipation of possible audits or public inquiries. Concurrently, the legal team engaged with government representatives, ensuring that deadlines, payment channels, and documentation met statutory requirements. These interactions were tense, precise, and highly strategic, reflecting the sensitivity of the matter and the visibility of the involved parties. Legal advisors navigated the balance between compliance and negotiation, seeking to protect Harry's interests while demonstrating full cooperation with authorities. Each email, phone call, and document required careful phrasing to maintain legal soundness and public credibility. The emotional dimension of the countdown was equally pronounced. Harry experienced waves of pressure, frustration, and resolve, knowing that any misstep could have lasting consequences for reputation, financial standing, and public perception. Advisors worked to support him not only through procedural guidance, but also through psychological reinforcement, providing perspective, reassurance, and strategies to manage stress under unprecedented scrutiny. The intensity of the moment underscored the intersection of personal responsibility and public duty, highlighting the profound human dimension behind the headlines. As the final hours approached, contingency planning intensified. Scenarios ranging from immediate payment confirmation to potential technical delays were rehearsed, with rapid response strategies developed for each possibility. Communications teams prepared targeted updates to preempt misinformation and manage audience interpretation. The goal was clear: ensure that compliance was demonstrable, verifiable, and aligned with both legal requirements and public expectation. Within hours, the payment was executed. Transactions confirmed, verifications completed, and acknowledgments secured. Harry's team confirmed compliance within the strict 48-hour mandate. The resolution was technical in nature, yet deeply symbolic. It represented a successful navigation of a multifaceted crisis that combined legal, financial, and reputational dimensions. The completion of the payment did not merely satisfy a numerical obligation. It signaled adherence to accountability, responsiveness to authority, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. Public reaction followed swiftly. Headlines shifted from speculation and suspense to coverage of compliance and consequence. Analysts offered evaluations of Harry's approach, praising meticulous execution while noting the pressures of high-profile responsibility. Social media reflected relief among supporters, tempered by ongoing debates about fairness and precedent. The narrative of accountability merged with the ongoing discourse surrounding royal privileges, public expectations, and the evolving relationship between monarchy and society. In the aftermath, reflections emerged regarding the human, procedural, and symbolic elements of the experience. For Harry, the countdown had been an exercise in precision, endurance, and strategic thought. For the public, it became a lens through which to examine notions of privilege, responsibility, and the pressures of life under extraordinary visibility. The events underscored the complex interplay between personal action, institutional expectation, and media amplification, offering insight into the dynamics that shape public perception and influence the interpretation of high-profile accountability.